Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Andrea and I'm Customer Experience Manager here at ProdPad. And with me today is Rosemary King, Director of Director of Training, not Director of Product at Mind the Product. So many words. We're going to start in just a minute, but before we get going, just to let you guys know, there is a Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom panel, or you can also ask questions directly in the chat. We will take a couple of minutes at the end to answer any questions that you may have for Rosemary. So you can drop them in there and I'll read them out loud so she can answer your questions. So with that said, Rosemary, go ahead.
Thank you, Andrea. First of all, I just do want to say I'm a remote worker. I'm one of those digital nomads everyone hears about. So I'm in a cafe doing this because that's just how I work. This is my office. So apologies, I'm going to try to speak really loud into the microphone. But if there is a little bit of background noise, I do apologize. Just a quick title correction. My technical title is Director of Training Products. Because when I joined Mind the Product Training, I was a very traditional product manager delivering digital software. Had been doing so for almost 8 years. And then I came on board here and I was like, well, I'm still going to be building products. They're just going to be training products. So we made it Director of Training Products. But I do run the whole program. And today we're going to be talking about some of the curriculum that we run that's actually, I think, our most impactful. So what you're about to see is the introduction slides to one of our workshops. So you're getting a little bit of free content here. And this is the introduction slides to Essentials, which is kind of our second workshop in our series. And it's really all about understanding how, as product managers, we need to start putting on our strategic alignment caps. It's all about how to effectively communicate, how to facilitate collaboration, so that you as a product manager can be effective in your job. Because so often I know all of us have found that really the main blocker for us doing great work is not the products, it's not the technology, it's not the users, it's sometimes our organizations. And as product managers, we need to get ahead of those challenges and really figure out how we can work the problem. Because while it sometimes can feel quite frustrating and hopeless, I think the one thing I do want to say that I've heard from all of my colleagues and peers is that it is actually a discipline that you can get great at. Facilitation, collaboration, frameworks, all of these ways in which to craft conversations towards an outcome. It's actually something that you can improve on. It's not just hopeless. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm really excited to open it up for questions. So the introduction is called Strategic Impact. And it kicks off with a quick quote: "We cannot control the wind, but we can direct the sail." And this is to say that sometimes we really don't have control over which way the wind blows, but we can figure out how our boat is going to sail through it. And that is our job as product managers. In many respects, our role is to craft the process. I call it process engineering. And there's a lot of different ways that you can characterize it, but it is our role. There isn't really anybody else in our core teams or in our organizations who is necessarily going to do it. We wish that higher up stakeholders would, but sometimes they don't. And so it does oftentimes fall on our shoulders. And inherently, a product manager is a strategy role. We are thinking about vision, we're thinking about psychology, we're thinking about markets, we're thinking about value and opportunities, risk and friction. All of these things are inherent in strategy discussions. So product managers do not usually wield authority over the organization. They don't directly manage the team they work with. I've very rarely been line manager of the folks who are on my teams. And we have very little ability oftentimes to dictate greater org goals. Sometimes we can control the goals of our piece of the pie, so to speak, but we don't get to say to the organization, we have to focus on engagement for the next quarter. That's just not what we get to do. So it's kind of tricky. So without any direct authority, with mostly influence at our command, how can we have an impact? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves as we enter this industry and as we enter the role is, where can I start making an impact? How can I help my organization, get the most out of the information that I have at my disposal and my work? So product managers are able to gather evidence that is valuable. We can influence stakeholders by making cases with data. And this is really all about evidence-driven decision-making and why it's so important. we can craft great stories because we have the ability to be very close to our customers, to be, gathering those kernels and those insights to craft a story that is both inspirational as well as influencing. And that's something that we absolutely have control over. And then we also can align process and collaboration. And this comes down to enablement and education. Lots of our organizations are going through transformations right now. The world is shifting underneath our feet, so to speak, and we're all living in a very new normal. And as product managers, we can let people know how the work we're doing is benefiting the org and how it could benefit a lot of people. And that's something that folks can take a lot of value out of. So your job isn't just about executing good process or hard skills. It just isn't. You're not there to write great stories or, work on technical wireframes or flows. The whole reason why the product manager role has come up is because there was a distinctive gap between product teams and business. And that gap was becoming extremely harmful in terms of churn, in terms of wasted work, in terms of users not getting what they need. And so the product role really sort of rose up in ascendancy. But somewhere along the way, I think we lost the fact, outside of the fact, that product managers are there to be that glue. So one of the things I say is that you can bake alignment and communication into your practice. So the whole point of the Essentials workshop, if you ever do take it, is that everything you do, from synthesis to demos to product road mapping review sessions to user research to synthesis, all of these are opportunities for you to pull stakeholders into the process and get their hands all over the decision that's going to be made. And if you can get that collaboration, then what you're doing is you're creating shared understanding. So this is just a quick visual for you, but basically process leads into collaboration, collaboration leads into alignment, and then you basically just loop back around it again and again and again. And that actually never stops. Just like user research, the alignment process with your stakeholders is something that begins and never ends, no matter how long the product is in existence. It's just that constant, beautiful looping cycle. It's sort of like a wave washing on a shore. It just always has to happen. So the one thing that I will say is that at Mind the Product, we don't call skills soft skills. We call them strategic skills. We call hard skills tactical skills, and we call soft skills strategic skills. So tactical and strategic. And the reason why we're pushing that vocabulary change is because we really believe that calling them soft skills really discounts their importance. Whereas strategic skills, I think most people can immediately recognize the value of. And this is just a really, really quick high-level list of some of the major buckets of strategic skills that product managers need to be in command of on an almost daily basis. And so one of the things that I invite you to do after this call is take a look at that list, and feel free to screenshot it on your computer. I'll just leave it up here for a second if you'd like to screenshot it. Just give you a hot second if you'd like to screenshot that. And then what you can do is a quick self-assessment. So of the skills listed in that slide, give yourself a score from 0 to 5. 0 if you have absolutely no experience, and then 5 if you feel like you're an absolute expert. And just kind of take a look at how you've scored yourself. Are there things that really concern you about that? Are there things where you feel like you're actually pretty good? And the thing that I encourage you to do is sit down with a trusted peer or a manager or a mentor that you really, really trust, and talk to them about your scores and assessments, and try to understand from them, do these feel accurate? Do you feel like, this is the person who you would discuss them with, do you feel that this is accurate? Do you feel like there are areas where I could improve of? Do you think I've scored myself too low or too high in certain areas? And then talk also about a game plan or an action plan towards improving some of those skills. And you don't have to improve all of them at one time. Maybe just pick the top 2 that you really feel like would be super valuable for you right now. So this is to say, we're going to end on this slide. Everything you do, from, again, talking to your customer, talking to your stakeholders, working with your core teams, is an opportunity for collaboration, and fingers crossed, if all is going well, building trust with your team and with your organization. And as product managers, starting to flex those muscles and understand ways in which you can pull people into the room, ways in which you can facilitate collaboration, ways in which you can help people come to the same conclusion as you without having to force it down their throats, is a really, really powerful practice to start developing. And this is exactly why it's the main point of our second workshop in our series, Following Foundations, which is really all about understanding the role and the key tenets of the role. We really believe that this strategic aspect of the role is so important, that we wanted people to start understanding it really, really early on in their progression. So that is kind of the high level overview of the concept. And basically, I think this is a really rich topic for questions, because there are no hard and fast rules. There are a million different ways in which to get at this. And so I always find it interesting for people to ask questions about what their challenges currently are. And so I'm really excited to hear some of the questions that you guys have around this topic. What's been your biggest friction points? What have you done that's helped? And I'll see what kinds of information and resources I might be able to provide.
Guys, at this time, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A and in the chats. One thing that popped out, at least for me, is at the beginning when you said about, not really having the power, but still having to do the job, is I hate the term CEO of product.
Uh-huh.
I know how you guys feel about it, but do you want to talk a little bit about, this term that somehow got really popular, about how product managers are the CEO of the product?
Yeah, I think that's like that term really sort of rose in ascendancy, and I remember exactly when it hit. Literally, I remember, because it was probably around 6 or 7 years ago. I was working in New York City, and I think it probably might have been somebody I knew who sort of like wrote quite a popular blog that went viral on being the CEO of your product. And I think the point that was originally made in that is that product managers do have to be looking at their product from all different angles, which is exactly what a CEO needs to be doing. And again, this is why the product manager is a strategic role. CEOs have to be strategic, and they need to be strategic by gathering information from lots and lots of diverse data points. Working with designers, working with technology, working with business stakeholders, working with marketing, legal, finance. Product managers have to make these kinds of rounds, and they have to be exposed to all of this different kinds of information. And so I think that's where there's an overlap between product managers and the CEO role, is because we do kind of need to have that bird's eye, eagle eye view of the situation at times. I think obviously where it becomes problematic is that CEOs have the ability to say yes or no, and that's the end of the discussion. And product managers never have that ability, or very, very, very rarely do they have that ability. And so I think a lot of people walk into the product manager role thinking that they're going to be able to sort of say, this is exactly what we should build, and then just go build it. And that's, not only is that not organizationally popular, but it's possible, but it's also not a good idea for product managers to think that that's what they should do, because we should be letting the users and the customers direct that, and their feedback and all of the different data. So I think that's kind of my perspective on product manager as CEO role, is that it's all about getting that bird's eye view, but to me, that's kind of where it ends in terms of similarities. Is that a helpful answer, Andrea?
I think so. And I think it's one of those things where accidentally something went viral, and just, it's like, kind of taking a different perspective on that. That one scientist who wrote about alpha males in wolves, and then turns out that there's no such thing as an alpha male, but now everybody thinks there's such a thing as an alpha male. And he's like, no, that's not what I meant. But anyway, a couple of people have asked if you could please scroll back to the skills slide. Because they didn't have a chance to screenshot it. But as we speak, there we go. So I hope that helps you guys. If you want to screenshot it now, you can go ahead and do so. But we do have a couple of other questions. The first is, what are ways to build back trust in an organization where it has been severely damaged? And likewise, the other question is very similar, which is, how do you deal with a team that has had a bad experience and is resistant to any type of structure? So essentially teams that haven't had a good experience with this.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult thing. And I have worked on a fair few number, and I know so many people have, of really, kind of toxic culture orgs. So I think, there's a couple of different ways that trust can begin to be rebuilt. And I think sometimes it can start outward or inward out. So obviously, you have core teams, product managers have direct contact, well, fingers crossed, you sit with these people on a daily basis. And so the place that I would start is by being really transparent with the team, calling what I call a weekly retro on Friday afternoons and just basically saying like, look, I know that things have been really rough. I understand that we're sort of getting it from all sides. The pace has been unrelenting, blah, 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 like all of the different problems that could be out there. And basically say, this is a retro for us to start trying to improve at least the culture that we have with each other. Because I think great core teams can bolster and support each other, even when the outside organization, is obviously being really difficult. And then once you, as a team, get really great at that feedback retrospective process, then you could potentially start thinking about opening that process up to one or two stakeholders who you think might be able to positively contribute to that conversation. And then seeing how you can grow that as a practice. I think retrospectives are one of the most powerful tools in terms of turning a team that's really downcast into a team that is geared for continuous improvement, and continuous improvement in not the product, but in the team practices. And a couple, sort of buzzwords I'm going to throw out to think about is that what you're looking for is, again, a sense of psychological safety within your team. People should not feel scared to criticize or call out when things are problematic. They should be doing so in a kind and personal way, but there shouldn't be fear to say, I made a mistake or this happened. Other things are courage. Teams who are courageous to say, actually, that thing that we thought could really work really isn't working. I think we need to, maybe come up with a different thought process around that. Other things are, again, just kindness, just the ability to sort of say something isn't working without pointing fingers and saying it's Bob's fault. And sort of once you establish that within the team, and also I think a sense of shared responsibility, like it should not just fall on the product manager to take all the action items from a retro. They should be shared, they should be assigned, and people should be accountable to the team and following up on them. So just a quick sort of overview on the retrospective process. I think other ways and avenues to start reestablishing trust, things that we talk about in the workshop are stakeholder interviews. It's a round of quite formal conversations that you would have with stakeholders to understand, what are your biggest needs and challenges. The thing that you're trying to really recreate or build back is empathy, I think. In toxic organizations, when you don't feel like people have your back, when you can't trust that they're going to make the best decision, or they're at least going to hear people out, and not act from a very sort of navel-gazing perspective, for lack of a better term, then basically what really falls apart is empathy. If you can't understand what someone is going to do, what action they're going to take, you can't have empathy for them because you have no idea, what's driving them. And so stakeholder interviews, I think, are a really wonderful way of reestablishing the ability to have empathy for the people that you work with.
Great, thank you for that answer. The next question we have is actually about the slide that you have up right now, which is how can someone improve their clear writing and conflict resolution skills?
Oh, writing is a really interesting one. I find that when I will say that I'm very lucky in that I kind of come from a very academic policy wonk background, and my mother was a professor. So, but that being said, academic writing and writing that's really conducive for product and sort of org communication is not the same as academic. So I think a couple of things to think about in terms of a great example of writing for your org, writing to report out, is making sure that the information is prioritized and really clearly laid out. and that it is extremely sliced back, to the main key ideas. So when I mentor people and when I coach product managers, and they specifically ask me for feedback on their writing style, normally what happens is I end up just cutting probably 3/4 of the emails or the reports that they show me. And we spend a lot of time talking about, like, what is the one thing you want people to take away from this email? What is the one thing that you want people to take away from this report? Or sometimes it's top 2 things. And more often than not, when I see people send emails, they're kind of block text, really, really long, no sense in terms of what I should be paying attention to. So I think product managers need to really get super clear about, the sort of sections of information they want people to pay attention to. Like, here's what we did, here's what we noticed, this is what we did, these are the main impact points. Because I think most writing in, modern product orgs is actually really trying to drive towards a conversation. So I think that's why with writing, less is very, very, very much more. And then if that can instill people to sit around a table and discuss the points, that is the best communication pathway, in my opinion. So keep your writing very, very short and super clear, clarified, prioritized, and structured well, and then hopefully drive towards having a conversation with key individuals to finish that conversation. And then the second one was conflict resolution. So there's a couple of really amazing resources that can be helpful in this. So some books that I've read, Radical Focus by Christina Wadka is a really interesting one in terms of helping you frame the conversation in a way that is probably more productive, which is all about outcomes and data. Because I think the thing that you want to do is not have opinion fights with individuals and stakeholders. It shouldn't be you against them. It should be both of you examining the data and drawing conclusions from it. That is the most productive conversation that product managers can push forward. And then, it's driving me crazy, but there's this really great book. I'm going to remember it and I'll send the name of it to Andrea, but there's a lot of really amazing books on conflict resolution. Oh my gosh, this is driving me nuts. I can't remember the name of the book. I was literally talking about it 2 days ago, but yes,
we can get back to it. Don't worry about it.
I'll get the name of the book and I'll send it to you. But there's a lot of resources out there. I think that the best thing to do, I find most people who are suffering, with problems around conflict resolution, I say sort of, well, what have you done, or what kind of reading or study have you done? They go, nothing. And I would say, the first thing that you can do is just sort of reach out, read a book that maybe was recommended by a friend. Or read a couple of blogs on it, or watch a couple of YouTube videos on it, and just start arming yourself with some kind of framework for your brain in terms of how to structure the conversations. Because the one thing I'll say is conflict is obviously an extremely emotional thing. So you need to be able to give yourself the space to kind of look at the situation objectively, and craft your arguments and perspective in a way that makes sense, that is unemotional. And so giving yourself at least one or two tools is really, really helpful. So, the best way to start with conflict resolution is to start studying. Start doing some reading, start doing some thinking around it. And then once you feel like you have a resource that resonates, start trying to slowly but surely putting it into practice.
Great, thank you for that. We have so many great questions, by the way. I hope we have time to answer all of them.
Yay!
Because they're just coming in like crazy.
I will say, Andrea, I do have unfortunately, a super hard stop at 5.
That's fine. We've got time. There's a lot of really great questions. This is really impressive. Everyone's super engaged today. So thank you, everyone. The next one is, have you done or do you recommend retrospectives with stakeholders? And I'm going to jump in really quickly and say, absolutely, yes, do it. We do it at ProdPad, and everyone in the team does retrospectives. But I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, hell yeah, definitely. I think retrospectives are a structure that work in so many different scenarios. I think the thing that you want to be conscious of is if they're very, very high level stakeholders, we're talking C-suite or VPs and stuff like that, I think you want to make sure that you're framing the retrospective really, really clearly. You know, we've had this problem, or the team is undergoing this, or, you know, the problem continues to kind of like, you know, stagnate, or those kinds of things. And then also make sure that you're setting a really, really clear time frame. It's probably these stakeholders aren't doing retrospectives very often. And so you don't want to sort of say like, for the past 10 years, this guy's been driving me crazy. You want to say, okay, this is a retrospective that's looking at the last quarter's performance. And then also make sure it's really clear about the categories that folks are sort of commenting on. If it's happies, shrugs, sads, if it's, you know, stop, start, continues, you know, there's so many different retrospective structures you can use, and just make sure everybody understands like how they're filling them out. But I think senior level stakeholders could really benefit from retrospectives. I think senior level stakeholders actually always benefit from frameworks, because I think in my experience, you know, a lot of senior level stakeholders always think that they have to have the answer, and they come in and they're always ready to sort of talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And the nice thing is about presenting them with a really clear framework to follow for a conversation is that it takes the pressure off them to have all the answers, and means that they can just come in as a participant sometimes, you know, again, depending on the stakeholder, of course. But I think as product managers, it's a huge favor to senior level stakeholders for us to come in and sometimes do that heavy lifting around, this is exactly how this conversation is going to go. And most of the time you get a lot of gratitude, especially when it goes well.
I would agree. The next question is, how can you be an effective product manager if your company doesn't have a clear or well-articulated strategy or desired outcomes? You can't.
Okay.
Like,
I was going to say, basically, the spoiler alert is you can't.
Yeah, TLDR, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's really, you know what's really sad, Andrea, is that actually this is the question I get all the time. So the one thing I'll say to the asker is that you are not alone. And I've actually firsthand experienced it. I've had friends experience it. I've had clients kind of perpetuate it. It is amazingly enough, like for as foundational a concept is, like this is our, you know, one metric that matters, or this is the one thing we care about, or this is, you know, the top 3 goals for the next quarter, or this is what we have to accomplish in, you know, calendar year 2019. You know, as simple as that sounds to say, it's the hardest thing in the world to do. And it takes a fair amount of discipline, and it takes a huge amount of the skills that we talk about in Essentials and that are touched on lately here. And so again, this is kind of where the empathy comes in, is that you can sort of, if you can gather empathy for your organization and maybe think about like, well, here's what's preventing us from getting to those goals, or to creating this, or, you know, this is why it's probably really difficult for us to stick to a set of goals, and start having empathy for that. And then if you have somebody at the organization whom you trust, who is, it may be sort of could also start brainstorming around how you as a product manager can have an impact. You know, how can you frame all of the conversations that you are having around outcomes? You know, that's, I think, the biggest thing with organizations who don't have these goals, is that they're very focused on outputs. Well, we need to build this tool, we need to build this button, we need this solution, we need this solution, we need this solution. And nobody is telling them or asking them truly, well, what do we expect that solution to accomplish for us? And usually that question brings somebody up short. And a lot of people think that solutions, a button, a tool, is an outcome. It's not, it's an output. It's something you're building to achieve something else. And so as a product manager, if you exist in an organization that doesn't have a really goals-oriented culture, an outcome-driven culture, then at least the one thing that you have control over is your language around that. And you can start, you know, gently but consistently calling out that what we're focusing on here is an output. What my team needs in order to be guided is a strong set of outcomes, you know, even if it's just around your little section of the tool. So that's where I would recommend starting.
Great, thank you for that. We've had a couple of questions come through around how to deal with development teams or technology teams that push back on what you're sending their way, which I find seems to be a bit of a troubling trend in some companies, where the tech team or the development team will just say, well, no, I disagree, so we're not going to do that. How do you balance that relationship with development, if you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I would say more that I've seen it a lot. I've always been very lucky that I've worked on balanced teams. Um, I don't think I've worked at a single organization where I didn't have a cross-functional team where engineers were embedded under my team. I also had a designer at my disposal, sometimes a data scientist, and we were all working on the same product together. It was our shared responsibility. And, the one thing I will say to anybody who is in this position is, for your next job or, as you look around the industry, like one thing that you might want to ask of organizations is, do you support cross-functional teams? Because that really basically erases this problem altogether. Because what it does is it gives you the ability to fold in those roles, specifically engineering, into every stage of the product development process so that they understand the vision, they understand the why, they understand customer context. It's so important to bring customers into the discovery process, to expose them to users, to help them understand why they are doing what they're doing and what the value is and why things are a specific priority. And if they don't, then that's when you get this pushback. You get, well, why is this important? Or this doesn't seem important. Because they don't know what they're building. They don't know what they're doing. And they're being treated like code monkeys who are basically just meant to sit there and punch keys quietly and never actually ask any questions. And what they're doing is trying to exert a sense of control because they don't understand. And so my question for you is, obviously it doesn't sound like you're on a cross-functional team, but how can you help them achieve understanding about why you're doing something? Can you expose them to customers? Can you show them customer research? Can you, bring forward some data? I really love bringing engineers and developers into customer interviews to listen. I love bringing at least one or two developers and engineers into synthesis sessions so that they can see firsthand the raw data from customer interviews and help boil up insights. I like to make sure that an engineer is present at prioritization conversations. Essentially, what I find is always true about circumstances where you're getting friction between product and engineering is that you two just aren't tightly coupled enough. There needs to be more back and forth and more information sharing instead of just this sense of command and control. I'm product, you're engineering, just build what I tell you, code what I tell you, and shut up about it. And it's, again, empathy. It always goes back to empathy. Like, why are these people behaving this way? Maybe because they don't understand enough. Well, how can I help them get that understanding and then open the door to that? Because the whole adversarial thing, I promise you, it never really moves. It never really gets better, and you're never going to win. And so it's pointless to try. What you have to do is lower your guard, be a bit vulnerable, start opening the door and sharing information across and create goodwill, because that's what's going to build that bridge.
I think that's an amazing tip, and definitely one thing that we do at ProdPad, as a way to help you, is we actually expose our development team to all of the feedback that comes in, and we have them as part of our Slack community, where they can talk to our customers directly.
You guys are great.
Thanks. We actually, we recently had, if you guys go to youtube.com/ProdPad, we did have a Q&A with our development team around how dev teams and product teams can work together. So, if you want to check it out and get a few tips from there, please go ahead and do so. And if you actually want to ask our dev team directly, tweet at us and we'll get our dev team to answer you.
Love it. Love the cross-referencing.
It's what we do. But we're big in collaboration, and I definitely agree that it's easier to say it's their fault. You can blame it on everyone else, but when you put yourself in their position, it's true that sometimes development teams are just treated like they're just supposed to code and just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Really, just do what I tell you.
Just do what I tell you. Yeah, it's a really horrible position to be in at the end of the day.
It is, totally.
Cool, we have another question. Where do you think drawing skills or design skills land in terms of, as you said, strategic
Yeah, super, super important actually in many respects. So funny, just before I hopped on this call, I was finishing up and finalizing um, a workshop deck that I'm actually teaching for the first time to a public audience tomorrow, and it's called mapping. And basically, mapping is the visualization of mental models, and a PM's ability to sort of just roughly sketch out and visualize a concept, whether that be a map, a process map, a user journey map, a wireframe, your product's flow, um, just anything that kind of needs to be like put on the board and objectively looked at. Product managers should feel very comfortable with that. They should be very comfortable with being able to lay out what the system is that you're talking about in a visual manner and pick it apart. And without the visualization of that, you're lost. There's just, it is about that visualization. So I think the drawing skills, again, it's not drawing, it's sketching. I would say that a lot of people worry. I'm a terrible drawer. I really am. Like I do stuff and it never looks good. But all I'm trying to do is facilitate a conversation. And so sometimes like I'll just start sketching and then just like slyly hand someone the pen and just be like, you draw it, or like get a designer in the room and get them to draw it and then we discuss it, that kind of thing. But you should not be shy to visualize things, especially, we live in a complex world. Like our customer journey is wrapped in our product journey, is wrapped in our organizational process, our team process. Like we exist in an incredibly complex, overlapping, spaghetti knot of systems. And we need to be able to remove the pressure on our poor little brains to get that information out in a way that makes sense and helps us understand it. And so that's another reason why we're doing a full day workshop on that. But the visualization of mental models is an incredibly strategic skill.
Cool, thank you for that. Next question is, I love this one. How do you manage or how do you recommend a product manager to manage unexpected changes, such as, impacts of feature development goals? I hate using the word timelines, but timelines. I would say don't have timelines. That's my philosophy. If that helps.
So I think the best thing that product managers can do when there's unexpected change, and that can be from a lot of different sections. It can be a product or a stakeholder saying, we need to build this next week. It has to get done, and or customer feedback has come back and been terrible. The best thing that you can do is make sure that you're giving yourself some space for evaluation of value versus cost, and understand the impact of a particular change. And so, if it's coming from a stakeholder, I think the best thing you can do is sort of say like, great, this is really helpful. Let me go and do a little bit more research on this and gather together some information and evidence that will help us structure our next conversation. And just give yourself some breathing room. Don't say yes, don't say no. Just say, this is really interesting. Let me go and gather some data and some evidence to understand this a little bit more deeply, because it's a risk right now that there's so many unknown unknowns. And I think that's the thing that you're always attempting to do when there's any kind of like massive change or shift, is look at it for inherent risk. What are the unknown unknowns? What could come to bite you in the ass? What assumptions are you making that you haven't validated? And then use that information to redirect that change, and prioritize it appropriately, see what's pushed down, and then have an appropriate conversation about the trade-offs because I think that's the thing I've found that's most disturbing about stakeholders, is that they don't understand that if something comes up and it's now newly on top of the backlog, then that automatically pushes other things down. As much as everybody wants to be Steve Jobs and like pretend to bend space and time, like he pretended to bend space and time, he didn't. He just burned a lot of people out. That's what he did. And everyone talks about him like it's a hero. And he wasn't. He was just sort of like an unrelenting manager. And in many respects, from everything I've heard about the culture at Apple, it's not always a positive thing. And so you need to be able to sort of surface those trade-offs with your stakeholders, and be able to talk about what realistically is going to get pushed down if something new has come on top.
Great, thank you for that. I think we're going to take one last question. There's so many, but there were a few questions that came through, which is why I'm picking this one, around setting a product vision, how to set a clear product vision that you can then communicate to stakeholders so that it's not, you know, confusing or it doesn't get lost somehow.
Oh, wow. So that's an 8-hour workshop right there, inherent in a very simple question. Setting a product vision and communicating with the stakeholders that is senior product management stuff for sure. So essentials really gets at the heart, like at the start of strategy. It's like what we're doing is starting to teach you how to use process in a way that is strategic. But setting a product strategy is actually like a whole other ball game in terms of the complexity and how difficult it is to align the organization around that sometimes, and then continue like through delivery, through steady state. It's a whole deal. I think the biggest thing, like a couple of traits that you want to kind of always keep top of mind when you're thinking about product vision is simplicity and clarity of mission are two of the biggest things that you need to keep top of mind. Because if it's not simple to explain, no one's going to understand it. And if it's not clear to you in the organization, then you're not going to know how to execute on it. And so if you're looking at a product vision or thinking about creating one, I think those are the two things that you really, really, really write those two words down: simplicity and clarity, and make sure that you're keeping those, front and center as you think about developing them. I wish I could answer more of that question, but it's a end up on, customer contact, customer development, currently it's just a product vision, and we're can't be shorter than a 2-day. If that's all helpful, but clarity and simplicity, keep those two things at the top of your mind.
Yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes. I was going to say that is not an easy question to answer, but for more information, take the Mind the Product course.
Yeah. Which
I've taken. Yeah, I was going to say I've taken a couple of Mind the Product courses, and I definitely recommend them for anyone that's interested. There's lots to learn. Our team is taking, all of us, I think, are in the process of taking, I want to say it's Essentials.
Which I just finished rewriting and updating, which I'm really excited about. So it's nothing too much has changed, but I've really tweaked, added, and that's the thing, like, because I'm a product manager coming into this, like, continuous iteration is just part of my deal. Like, so
I love that.
Yeah, it's really fun. And I'm always like, every time I present the course, which isn't often, very, very often, but I'll go back, take all that feedback, implement it back into the deck. And all of our trainers teach the same deck with their own stories and experiences, obviously driving the teaching. But we always really wanted to make sure everybody got a super consistent experience. So if you're on this call and you're listening in the West Coast, or you're listening in someplace else and you're taking our workshop, just know that it's going to be the same workshop you would get from us in London as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for answering.
Dude, this was so fun.
Great presentation. Thank you guys who've been so involved. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I'm actually a little bit baffled. There's so much that came through. But we are going to follow up with a video of this next week. We're also going to send you a link for you to sign up to the Mind the Product training courses, so you can check that out. Where do you guys actually offer them? I know it's London, in the West.
Oh my gosh. So we've got 12 cities. So we've got West Coast, Seattle, San Francisco. We've got Dallas, Austin. We've got Boston, New York, Toronto. We've got Dublin, Amsterdam, Berlin, London, Manchester.
Oh, it's amazing. Some people are asking if they're available in South America.
Sadly, no, but I would love for them to come down there. We've actually, one plug is on our training website. We have a tool that says find your closest Mind the Product training. If you use that tool and you don't find a training close to you, you can request us to come to you. And that's how we're actually building our data around where we should expand next. So if you want us to come to your city and bring a workshop to your city, then go use that tool. It's soon to have its own dedicated landing page, and you can share it out to, you know, all your product communities, all your product managers, and say, come on, let's get a Mind the Product training in South America, or in, you know, Joburg, or in Cape Town, you know, and if you get like, you know, a bunch of people to sign up, we're going to say, okay, we'll come to South America. It sounds like we're going to sell tickets down there.
So you guys know what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Ask for it.
You have the power. You have the power.
You have the power. Literally a title of this. You've got the power to make this happen.
That's right.
Again, thank you, Rosemary, for joining us. Thank you guys for joining us as well. Like I said, we will be sending out the recording early next week. If you want to share it with your team or your stakeholders, go for it. And thanks again, and we'll see you guys next month in our next webinar.